The wind screamed through the narrow streets of the human colony. Snowflakes swirled in the air, sharp as tiny blades against the skin. The night was dark, and the moon hid behind thick clouds. In that freezing world, a small figure moved slowly, her steps weak, her breath turning into white mist. She was not human. Her skin had a pale, bluish tone, glowing faintly in the dark. Her hair was wet from the snow, sticking to her cheeks. Her thin clothes were torn and useless against the cold. Every step she took sent pain through her numb legs. Her name was Lyra. For as long as she could remember, she had never known warmth. She had slept on metal floors, in cold corners, and under open skies. Her kind was not welcome in human colonies. Whenever she had tried to find shelter before, the doors had shut quickly, the faces behind them cold and fearful. Tonight, she had already knocked on many doors. Some had shouted at her to go away. Some didn't even open. Her hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely lift them. Her feet sank into the deep snow, each step heavier than the last. In the distance, she saw it, a faint yellow light glowing in a window. It looked warm, like the kind of place she had only seen in dreams. Her heart beat faster, not from hope, but from fear. She knew this was the last door she could try before the cold claimed her. Lyra walked slowly toward it. The wind pushed against her back as if trying to stop her. When she reached the small wooden steps leading to the door, she paused. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling from exhaustion. She told herself not to expect kindness. Kindness was a lie she could no longer believe. Still, she knocked. At first, there was no sound, only the howl of the wind. She knocked again, a little harder, her frozen knuckles aching. Then she heard footsteps inside, slow and heavy. The door opened a little, just enough for her to see a man's eyes in the dim light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair falling messily across his forehead. The firelight from inside cast a golden glow on his face. He looked at her without speaking, his gaze moving from her shivering hands to her snow-covered hair. For a moment, Lyra wanted to run. Humans rarely looked at her without hatred, but there was something different in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but not cruelty either. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was too cold, too tired to explain. Man's voice finally broke the silence. Low and steady, "You're freezing," he said. She didn't answer. Her instinct told her to stay silent. Speaking had never helped her before. He opened the door wider. The sudden wave of heat from inside made her knees weak. Behind him, a fire burned in the corner, its crackle reaching her ears. The smell of cooked food floated in the air. It was the smell of safety, something she had never known. "Come in," he said simply. Lyra's heart pounded. Was this real or some cruel trick? Her eyes darted around the doorway, looking for signs of danger, but there was only warmth, only the quiet hum of a safe home. She stepped inside slowly. The moment the door closed behind her, the wind's roar was gone. The air inside wrapped around her like a blanket. Her legs shook so badly she thought she might fall. The man noticed and placed a chair near the fire. "Sit," he said. Lyra obeyed. The heat touched her skin, and it hurt. Warmth was strange to her body. Her fingers tingled painfully as the cold left them. She kept her eyes on the man, unsure why he had let her in. He didn't ask her questions, didn't demand anything. Instead, he quietly placed a thick blanket over her shoulders. It was heavy, soft, and carried the faint scent of him, clean and earthy. She gripped it tightly, afraid he might take it away. But he didn't. He just stood near the fire, watching the snow fall outside. The silence between them was not the dangerous kind. It was calm, almost peaceful. For the first time that night, Lyra felt her eyes grow heavy. The cold was losing its grip, and warmth was seeping into her bones. Still, she stayed alert. Kindness was dangerous, and she had learned never to trust it too quickly. She didn't know his name, and he didn't know hers. But something told her that opening this door might have just changed everything. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, For the first time in her life, Lyra felt the edge of something she had never known. Safety. The blanket around Lyra's shoulders felt unreal. It was warm, soft, and smelled faintly of smoke and wood. Her fingers dug into it as if it might disappear any second. The firelight painted the small room in shades of gold and orange. It was nothing like the cold, gray nights she had known. The man moved quietly, his boots making soft thuds on the wooden floor. He walked to a table near the fire and poured something from a kettle into a cup. Steam rose from it. Carrying the scent of herbs, he placed the cup on a small table beside her chair. "Drink," he said simply. Lyra hesitated. She had learned to be careful with anything given to her, but the warmth of the cup in her hands was impossible to ignore. She took a slow sip. The taste was strange but soothing. It slid down her throat and spread warmth through her chest. Her fingers stopped shaking a little. He sat in a chair opposite her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The fire popped between them. Neither spoke for a long time. She studied his face, trying to read him. His eyes weren't sharp with suspicion like most humans she had met. They were steady, like someone who had already made up his mind. "You're not from here," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Lyra kept her gaze on the fire. She didn't want to talk about where she was from or why she was here. He seemed to understand because he didn't push. Instead, he stood up again and disappeared into another room. When he returned, he was holding a folded blanket and a small pillow. Her heart tightened. This was the moment he would send her away. But he didn't. He placed the blanket on the bed in the corner of the room. "You can sleep there tonight," he said. Lyra froze. No one had ever offered her a bed before. Beds were for people who belonged, not for someone like her. "I can sleep here?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he replied, his voice calm but firm. Her eyes searched his face, still waiting for the cruel joke. He must have seen her doubt. "I don't lock my doors against the cold," he said. "Not when someone's freezing outside." The words felt heavy, like they carried more meaning than he spoke aloud. Lyra didn't answer. She didn't trust herself to speak without her voice breaking. She moved slowly toward the bed. The mattress dipped under her weight, soft and welcoming. She ran her hand over the blanket. It was thick and warm. A lump formed in her throat. Her eyes stung, not from the cold, but from something she didn't want to name. The man returned to his chair by the fire. He didn't watch her, didn't try to talk. Instead, he sat quietly, giving her space. Lyra lay down, still wrapped in the first blanket he'd given her. The warmth was almost too much. Her body wasn't used to it. Her eyes closed for a moment, but she forced them open. She couldn't fall asleep without knowing more about him. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Daniel," he replied without turning his head. She waited, hoping he might ask hers, but he didn't. Maybe he knew she wasn't ready to give it. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. The sound of the storm only made the room feel warmer. Lyra shifted on the bed, her muscles relaxing in ways they never had before. Still, her mind stayed sharp. She remembered other times she had been offered shelter, only to find out it was a trap. But Daniel didn't move toward her. He didn't demand she repay him. He just sat there, watching the flames. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, marking the slow passing of time. The longer she stayed in that room, the more the fear in her chest loosened. She didn't realize when her eyes closed. The sound of the fire became distant, the warmth of the bed pulling her deeper. For the first time in years, her dreams were not of cold cages or mocking voices. Instead, she dreamed of sitting by a fire without fear, of hearing a human voice that didn't carry anger. Somewhere in the night, she stirred. She heard movement. Daniel was placing another log on the fire. When he glanced toward her, she quickly shut her eyes, pretending to be asleep. But she felt the shift in the air, a kind of silent promise. He was keeping the fire alive for her, not for himself. When morning came, pale light crept through the window. Lyra opened her eyes slowly, half expecting to be alone. But Daniel was there, sitting in the same chair. "You're awake," he said. She nodded, unsure how to thank him. The warmth of the bed still clung to her, and for the first time in her life, she realized she had survived the night without fear. Lyra sat up slowly. The blanket slid from her shoulders, and the cold morning air touched her skin. But it wasn't the biting cold she was used to, the kind that sank deep into her bones. This was gentle, the kind of coolness that made her appreciate the warmth she still carried from the night. Daniel was by the table, pouring hot water into 2 cups. The smell of something fresh drifted through the room. She watched him quietly, wondering why he hadn't told her to leave yet. Most humans never allowed an alien to stay past sunrise. He glanced over his shoulder. "Tea," he said simply. Sliding 1 cup toward her, her fingers curled around it. The warmth seeped into her skin, reminding her of the night before. She still couldn't believe she had slept in a real bed. The mattress had been soft, the pillow warm, and the blanket heavy enough to make her feel safe. It was nothing like the cold metal floor she had grown up on. Daniel sat across from her, sipping his own tea. He didn't ask questions about where she came from or why she had been out in the storm. Lyra found that strange. Most people would demand answers before offering help. He simply said, "The storm will last for days." As if that explained everything, her heart skipped. If he meant what she thought, it meant she could stay. But she didn't dare ask. Hope was dangerous. It could be ripped away faster than the warmth in her hands. She glanced toward the bed again. It was still neatly made, except for the corner where she had curled up. Her mind replayed the moment she had first touched it. The disbelief, the suspicion, the overwhelming comfort. Beds were a luxury her kind didn't get. To humans, they were normal, but to her, it was like being handed a piece of another life. "You're staring at it." Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts. She blinked, embarrassed. "I've never—" she began but stopped. He tilted his head slightly, waiting. "I've never had a bed before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't pity her either. Instead he said, "Then it's about time." "You did." The simplicity of his words made her throat tighten. It was as if he didn't see it as a big deal, as if having a bed was something everyone deserved. She wanted to believe him, but her mind kept reminding her of the times kindness had turned into cruelty. She thought of the trader who once gave her food, only to lock her up for a week. Of the farmer who offered her shelter, but made her work until her hands bled. Trust was something she couldn't hand over so easily. Daniel stood and walked to a small cabinet. From inside he pulled out a folded set of clothes. "They'll be big on you," he said, placing them on the bed. "Change into them. Those rags you're wearing won't keep you warm." She hesitated, clutching her blanket tighter around her. He must have noticed her hesitation because he added, "You can use the room. I'll step outside." The fact that he didn't watch her made her chest feel strange, a mix of relief and confusion. When he left, she slowly got up and touched the clothes. They were thick, soft, and smelled faintly of soap. Her fingers lingered on the fabric, afraid it might vanish like a dream. When she was dressed, she sat back on the bed, waiting. Daniel returned a few minutes later, carrying a plate with bread and something warm. "Eat," he said, setting it in front of her. The bread was soft, the smell making her mouth water. She ate slowly at first, then faster when the hunger overcame her. For a while, the room was silent except for the sound of the storm outside. Snow tapped softly against the window. Lyra realized she was warm, fed, and safe, things she had never experienced all at once. Her eyes went back to the bed again. She knew she might have to leave one day, but for now it was hers. And that thought alone felt like a dangerous kind of happiness. Later Daniel spoke, his tone quiet but steady. "You can stay until the storm passes." Her chest tightened. It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was more than she expected. She nodded, unsure if her voice would work. That night when she lay down again, she didn't cling to the blanket out of fear. She didn't wake up every hour to check if the door was locked. Instead, she listened to the fire's crackle, her body sinking into the softness beneath her. It was the bed she had never known. And though she didn't realize it yet, it was the beginning of something far bigger than a place to sleep. The storm outside showed no sign of ending. Snow piled high against the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. Inside the small wooden house, the fire burned steadily, casting a warm glow over the walls. Lyra sat near it, her legs tucked under the thick blanket Daniel had given her. The warmth had reached her skin, but not the cold place inside her heart. She didn't want to think about the past, but memories had a way of breaking through when the body was still. They came like shadows, quiet at first, then heavy and sharp. She remembered metal walls that smelled of rust and fear. She remembered the rough voices of men who laughed when she begged for water. She remembered the dark, endless nights where cold bit deeper than hunger. She closed her eyes tightly, willing the thoughts away. But the more she tried, the more they pushed forward. A single tear slipped down her cheek, hot against her skin. She wiped it quickly, afraid Daniel might see. He was sitting across the room, fixing something on the table, a small lantern. His hands were steady, his focus calm. She wondered if he could feel her watching him. Part of her wanted to speak, to tell him about the things she had seen, but another part screamed to keep quiet. Words had never saved her before. Daniel glanced up. "You're quiet," he said, not as a question but as an observation. Lyra gave a small shrug. "Silence can be safer," she replied softly. He nodded, not pressing for more. That simple act, not forcing her to talk, made her chest ache. Most humans she had met wanted to know everything about her, so they could use it against her. Daniel seemed different. He didn't look at her like a problem to solve or a thing to trade. He looked at her like someone who was simply there. Later that evening, she drifted into sleep on the bed. The blanket was heavy over her, the pillow soft against her head, but in her dreams, she wasn't here. She was back in the cages. The sound of chains rattled in her ears. A voice whispered her name like a threat. She tried to run, but the ground froze beneath her feet, trapping her. She woke with a sharp gasp, her heart pounding. The room was dim, lit only by the low glow of the fire. Daniel was there, sitting in his chair, his eyes meeting hers instantly. "You're all right," he said quietly. Lyra swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. For a long moment, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. Finally, she whispered, "I used to sleep on the floor of a transport cage." Her voice trembled. But she didn't stop. They would leave us there for days, sometimes weeks. In the cold, she gripped the blanket tighter. When you've been cold that long, warmth feels like it's lying to you. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't ask how she had escaped. Instead, he said, "That I'll make sure the warmth here never lies to you." The words landed in her chest like a weight, a steady, solid weight, not a promise she thought he'd break. For the first time, Lyra believed he might mean it. Still, her past clung to her. She kept glancing at the door, expecting it to burst open. She listened for footsteps in the snow that weren't his. But the only sound was the storm's howl fading into the distance. That night, she couldn't fall asleep again. Daniel noticed without a word. He moved the chair closer to the bed and sat there. His presence was strange. Not threatening, not heavy, just there. It was like a silent shield between her and the world. She watched him for a while. The firelight flickered over his face, making the lines around his eyes look deeper. He didn't seem like someone with easy answers or a perfect life, but he seemed like someone who didn't turn away when things got hard. Eventually, her eyes grew heavy again, this time when she drifted into sleep. The past stayed in the shadows, and when she woke in the morning, Daniel was still in the chair. It was the first time in years she had slept through the night without waking in fear. The morning light slipped through the frost-covered window. Lyra sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Daniel had made it without asking her what she wanted, as if he already knew she needed something warm. The fire still burned in the corner, filling the room with a soft crackle. For the first time since she arrived, she noticed how peaceful the place felt. Daniel sat across from her, quietly eating bread. Every now and then, his eyes lifted to meet hers. He didn't speak until she had finished her tea. "You don't have to leave," he said suddenly. His voice steady. Lyra froze, the words hitting her harder than she expected. "What?" she asked softly. "You can stay here until you want to leave," he repeated, her heart twisted. It sounded too easy, too simple. Nothing in her life had ever been that simple. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Daniel shrugged slightly. "I know enough." He leaned back in his chair, the wooden frame creaking under his weight. "You needed a place to get warm. I have one. That's all there is to it." But Lyra knew that wasn't all. No human took in an alien without a reason. She studied him, searching for the hidden motive. Was he going to ask her to work for him? Was this some test before he threw her out? She had seen it all before, kindness with sharp edges, but Daniel's face didn't hold that look. It was just calm. That calm was more dangerous to her heart than cruelty ever was. The rest of the day passed slowly. Daniel showed her how to light the fire properly and keep it alive. He gave her simple instructions on where things were kept in the kitchen. Lyra listened carefully, though a part of her still believed she might be gone by tomorrow. By evening, she found herself standing near the window. Outside, the snowstorm had weakened, but the wind still moved through the streets. She could see the distant glow of other homes in the colony. Her chest tightened. She had knocked on those doors before. Not one had opened for her, and now one had. But she didn't know how long it would stay open. After dinner, Daniel leaned against the table and looked at her. "You don't talk much," he said. She looked down. "Talking never made things better for me." He nodded slowly, as if he understood. "Then don't talk," he said. "Just live." The words were strange to her. Living was something other people did. She had only survived, but now there was a bed, warm food, and a human who hadn't hurt her. She didn't know what to do with that. That night, she returned to the bed without hesitation. The blanket was waiting for her. The pillow still smelled faintly of wood smoke. She lay there listening to Daniel move about the room. Every sound was clear. The creak of the floorboards, the quiet closing of a drawer, the shift of his chair. She realized she was memorizing them without meaning to, as if those sounds were proof that she was not alone. But safety, she knew, was fragile, and as she drifted towards sleep, she couldn't shake the thought that someone might take it away. The colony wasn't known for kindness toward her kind. If anyone found out she was here, they might come for her. She opened her eyes in the dark, staring at the flicker of the fire. If that day came, she didn't know if Daniel would still choose to stand in front of her instead of stepping aside. She didn't know yet that the test of that choice was coming soon. And when it came, it would be the moment that decided if she could truly call this place safe. The storm had finally passed. The streets outside Daniel's home were quiet under a thick layer of snow. Lyra sat near the fire, her hands busy folding the blanket she had used the night before. For a brief moment, life felt almost normal, but that peace didn't last. A sharp knock hit the door. Loud and heavy, Lyra's head snapped up, her heart instantly pounding. Daniel, who had been fixing a small tool on the table, froze for half a second before standing. His eyes flicked toward her, calm but alert. "Stay here," he said quietly. Lyra's body tensed. She had heard knocks like that before, the kind that never brought good news. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her bare feet pressing into the rug. Daniel opened the door, and cold air spilled into the room. Two men stood outside. Their jackets were lined with fur, and snow clung to their boots. One of them had a long scar across his cheek, the other a rifle slung over his back. "Morning, Daniel," the scarred one said, though his tone carried no friendliness. "We've heard something." Daniel didn't step aside. "What kind of something?" he asked evenly. The man's eyes flicked past him, trying to see inside. "Word is, you've got company," he said. "Not the kind this colony welcomes." Lyra's grip on the blanket tightened until her knuckles turned white. She could hear their voices clearly, each word a nail in her chest. The man with the rifle shifted, his gaze sharp and searching. "Mind if we come in?" he asked, though it didn't sound like a question. Daniel's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I do mind," he said. "There's nothing here for you." Scarface smirked. "Unless the rumors are true, rumors don't interest me," Daniel replied. "And they shouldn't interest you either." The air outside the doorway was tense. The two men exchanged a glance. Finally, Scarface leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough that it felt more dangerous. "If we find out you're hiding one of them, Daniel, there will be trouble." Then they turned and walked away, their boots crunching in the snow. Daniel closed the door slowly. Lyra stayed frozen near the fire, her breathing shallow. "They know," she whispered. Daniel turned to her, his expression unreadable. "They suspect," he corrected. "That's different." Her eyes were wide. "You should make me leave," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll come back and they'll bring more." Daniel stepped toward her, his tone firm. "I'm not throwing you out into the cold so they can feel powerful." She shook her head, her stomach twisting. "You don't understand. Daniel, people like that don't stop. They will, if I make them," he said, the calm in his voice more unsettling than anger would have been. For the rest of the day, Lyra couldn't relax. She kept glancing at the door, listening for the sound of boots on the snow. Daniel carried on as if nothing had changed, chopping wood outside, checking the roof for snow damage. But every time he came back in, his eyes went straight to her, as if making sure she was still there. Night fell, and the firelight filled the room once again. Daniel sat in his chair, a rifle now leaning against the wall within reach. Lyra lay on the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept replaying the men's words. She imagined them breaking down the door, dragging her out into the cold. She imagined Daniel standing in their way, and what might happen to him. Hours passed, then it happened. Another knock, louder than before. Lyra shot upright, her heart in her throat. Daniel was already on his feet, moving to the door. This time, he didn't open it fully. He stood in the doorway, his voice low and hard. "If you've come to make threats, leave now," a voice outside sneered. "Or what?" Lyra couldn't see them, but she could hear the shift of boots on wood. Daniel's tone didn't change. "Or you'll find out." Silence followed, then the sound of retreating steps. When he closed the door, he didn't look shaken, but Lyra could see the way his jaw was tight. "They're testing you," she said quietly. "They're testing both of us," he corrected. That night, Daniel didn't sit in his usual chair. Instead, he sat by the door, his rifle across his lap. The fire burned low, shadows flickering across his face. Lyra lay in the bed, the blanket pulled up to her chin. She realized something then. The danger outside was real, but so was the choice Daniel had made. He had chosen to stand between her and it, no matter what came through that door. Morning came slowly. The pale winter light crept through the window, turning the frost into a sheet of silver. Lyra opened her eyes to see Daniel still by the door, his rifle resting against the wall. He looked tired, but there was no sign of fear in his face. For a long moment, she just watched him, realizing he had stayed awake the whole night. The fire had burned low, but the room was still warm. She sat up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Daniel glanced her way and gave a small nod, as if to say, "We're still here." It was a simple thing, but it made her chest tighten. She wasn't used to surviving nights without losing something. He stood and moved toward the table, pouring water into a pot to boil. "You can rest now," he said. "It's safe." Lyra hesitated. Safe. The word felt strange on her tongue, like it didn't belong to her life. But as she looked around the little house, she realized that maybe it did, at least here. They ate in silence, the quiet not uncomfortable anymore. Outside, the snow-covered street was empty. No boots, no knocks, no hostile voices. Daniel didn't mention the men from last night, and neither did she. It was as if the unspoken truth was enough, that they were still together. And that mattered more than anything. Later Daniel went to chop more wood. Lyra stood at the window, watching him work. Each strike of the axe sent snowflakes falling from the branches above. He didn't look like a man who had just spent the night guarding someone else's life. He looked steady, the way mountains looked against a storm. When he came back inside, his breath fogging the air, he set the logs down by the fire. "You've been staring at me for a while," he said with the faintest trace of a smile. She turned away, embarrassed. "I was thinking," she murmured. "About leaving?" He asked, his tone neutral. She shook her head slowly. "About staying." Daniel paused, the log still in his hands. "You don't owe me anything, Lyra," he said. "I know," she replied, her voice soft but certain. "That's why I want to stay." The fire crackled between them, filling the space where more words might have been. For Lyra, this wasn't about warmth anymore. It wasn't about the bed or the food or the safety from the cold. It was about the fact that someone had chosen to stand for her, even when it cost them something. That night, she lay in the bed again. The blanket was familiar now, the pillow a comfort she didn't think twice about. But she still remembered the first night she had touched them, the disbelief, the fear that it was temporary. Now that fear was fading, replaced by something she hadn't dared to feel in years: trust. Daniel sat in his chair by the fire, but his posture was relaxed for the first time. The rifle was nearby, but it leaned idly against the wall instead of resting in his hands. Outside, the snow fell softly, a quiet rhythm against the roof. Inside, the air felt warmer than the flames. Alone could make it. At some point, Lyra spoke without planning to. "I never had a warm bed, Daniel," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "Until you." Daniel looked over, his eyes steady but softer than she had ever seen them. "Well," he said, "then I guess it's yours now." Her throat tightened. The words weren't dramatic, but they were enough to make her believe that maybe this wasn't just a pause in the cold. Maybe it was the start of something she could finally call a life. When she closed her eyes, there were no chains in her dreams, no cages, only the sound of the fire, the safety of the blanket, and the knowledge that the man sitting by the door would still be there when she woke. And for the first time, the bed wasn't just warm. It wasn't just a place to rest. It was home.